When Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 3 months ago, it united the West and NATO in a way that most people never thought possible. Certainly not after the strains that Iraq, Afghanistan, and even the presidency of Donald Trump put on the alliance. But just look at who wants into NATO right now. Finland, which shares an 800-mile border with Russia and famously neutral Sweden, are actually both petitioning for membership in the 73-year-old military alliance. In fact, the leaders of both nations met with Joe Biden at the White House on Thursday, and the president says that Sweden and Finland have the full, total, complete backing of the United States.
Finland and Sweden make NATO stronger, not just because of their capacity, but they're strong, strong democracies.
But all is not well on the Western Front. NATO operates on a consensus, and that means all 30 current members must vote unanimously to admit new nations into the alliance. And so far, there is one holdout, Turkey. It is showing how the Ukraine war is testing allies in the West. Turkey is practically one of the OG members of NATO, if you will. It was admitted back in 1952 as the Cold War was really heating up, and it is home to NATO's second largest military after our own here in the United States. But the longtime Turkish president, Recep Erdogan, now says that his nation opposes Sweden and Finland joining NATO because they support terror. No, really, Erdogan says that both Nordic countries have been safe havens for members of the Kurdish Workers' Party, known as the PKK, which has fought Turkey for Kurdish independence for decades. And Turkey has actually designated the PKK as a terrorist group. In fact, so did the United States in 1997. But in the past decade, Washington has also armed and backed PKK-allied fighters in the Syrian civil war. Now, Erdogan says that he opposes the entry of Sweden and Finland into NATO because those countries stopped selling arms to Turkey in 2019. They did this shortly after Donald Trump withdrew U.S. forces from northern Syria, allowing Turkish troops to come in and basically wipe out Kurdish positions. Okay, it makes sense that members of the same alliance really shouldn't have arms embargoes against each other, especially a military alliance. But critics say there's actually more to all of this. Turkey is using its veto power as leverage to get more for itself. And some say that Erdogan is actually gunning for more attention from Washington. Just last week, the Turkish president complained to reporters that he doesn't enjoy as good of a working relationship with President Biden as he did with previous U.S. presidents like Obama and Trump. But then again, Biden and Erdogan do have one thing in common: sinking poll numbers amid high inflation. And some analysts think that Erdogan is actually using his veto power to try and drum up his domestic support before elections next year. And Turkish officials this week suggested to Bloomberg that they also want more weaponry from their NATO allies, including American F-35 fighter jets, which they were barred from getting after buying missile defense systems from Russia. That's right. Don't forget that Erdogan and Vladimir Putin have had a very close working relationship for nearly 20 years, which, as you can imagine, is a bit awkward for Turkey's fellow NATO allies. So are these Turkish concerns about Sweden and Finland genuine, or are they just being the Joe Manchin of NATO? And what does this all mean for the future of the alliance as Russia continues to bomb Ukraine? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Stephen Cook, Senior Fellow for Middle East and Africa Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Stephen, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for making time for us. This week, Vladimir Putin said that Sweden and Finland joining NATO would pose a direct threat to him. It's similar language to what we heard when he talked about Ukraine a couple years ago joining NATO. How is Turkey more concerned about this than Russia? I mean, how legitimate are Erdogan's stated concerns about Sweden and Finland?
Well, of course, there are concerns that the Turks have over the presence of PKK in Sweden and Finland. But the idea that this poses a security threat to Turkey and therefore the Turks want to keep Sweden and Finland out of the alliance is just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. What the Turks are really after are a number of things. First, this comes at a time when the Turks have requested 60 new F-16s and the upgrade kits for another 80 of those F-16s. It also comes at a time that the Turks are still upset about the fact that they have been barred from the F-35 program for, as you mentioned, their purchase of a Russian air defense system that was designed specifically to shoot down NATO aircraft. So it's clear that Erdogan, despite whatever public complaints he's making, is after something other than the PKK that is hanging out in Stockholm and Helsinki. He's after these goodies from the U.S. military inventory. There's probably one other issue that is also at play here, is that a state-controlled bank in Turkey called Halkbank has been under investigation by the Department of Justice for years. And the Turkish government has sought over and over and over again to make this case go away. The Turkish foreign minister was in Washington this week. He once again asked to make this case go away.
So 2 questions on that front. One, let's talk about another thing Erdogan might want. Turkey has been trying to join the European Union for decades. It's an effort that kind of fell apart over the past few years over its human rights concerns. But now all of a sudden you have pro-government Turkish media publishing stories on how much Turkey joining the EU would benefit other members. Could this be also a play by Erdogan in Turkey to gain some traction on the European Union accession front? Or could they also, to your point about the Turkish bank, basically leverage this to get the Americans to drop this case? I mean, the second part is more about how badly does America want Sweden and Finland into the NATO alliance for them to drop that investigation?
Yeah, and I think that on the question of the European Union, it's regardless of what the pro-government press is saying in Turkey, it's a dead letter. I don't think that the Europeans are going to drop their objections to Turkish human rights practices in order to get Finland and Sweden into NATO, which is, of course, a different organization. I think the Turks are throwing up a lot of different smoke screens here, and it relates to what your lead-in it was talking about, is that Erdogan is about to begin an extended electoral period in which he will stand for office once again. And he's looking, for concessions, which he can declare a win, or even if he doesn't get those concessions, he can ramp up his nationalist rhetoric, which is also a win for him because of the vast reservoir of both anti-Americanism in Turkey and anti-Western sentiment.
All right, so speaking of human rights in Turkey, there was this interesting column in the Wall Street Journal this week by former Senator Joe Lieberman, who co-authored it. It suggests that Turkey doesn't fulfill NATO's democratic criteria for members anymore, and that NATO charter should be changed to allow for Turkey's expulsion. What's your take on that? I mean, is there any realistic chance to it? Does that open a can of worms with countries like Hungary as well, whose track record on democracy can sometimes be questionable in its policies and foreign policy with Russia, with Viktor Orban?
Of course it would. But we should all keep in mind that the original entry into NATO, and as you point out, Turkey is an OG, democracy really wasn't a requirement. Turkey was democratic enough, but that wasn't really the concern of the original members who came together to form the alliance, the United States being the most important one of those. It would be very difficult to execute what Senator Lieberman is suggesting because, as you well know, NATO works on a consensus. So that would mean that Turkey would have to vote itself out of NATO, and that's not going to happen.
All right. Stephen, one last question for you, and all of this about the future of NATO. What does this mean for the alliance going forward? Putin has a new 830-mile border with NATO if, in fact, Finland and Sweden are in. Western missiles can reach Moscow much faster. Could this potentially invite more conflict?
Well, this has been a debate that has been raging since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is, did the NATO expansion of the 1990s lead to this moment? I think that at this point, it's mostly an academic argument, and that a resurgent Russia is clearly a threat to the West. And to the extent that Finland and Sweden are good candidates to join the alliance, it only strengthens it. As Russia fares, though, in this war, it may ultimately, if they continue to do poorly, ultimately diminish the rationale for bringing in more members right now.